2021 and welcome you all here. Just to remind you that this meeting is being live streamed. We have a number of matters on the agenda, so I would ask you all to stick to your 3-minute time limit for addresses. It's much appreciated by the panel if you can. I'll start by introducing the members of today's panel. My name is Paul Steen, I'm the chair. The expert members are Mr. Peter Brennan and Ms. Sharon Beale, and the community member is Ms. Alison Small. I'd ask the members of the panel to disclose any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to each and every item of the agenda. I have none.
I have none either.
Thank you.
Paul, I occasionally, in my capacity at GML Heritage, have worked with SJB architects.
Yeah, I don't think that's a conflict of interest unless it relates to a particular item.
No.
All right, well, that can be noted. Thank you. Let's start in on the agenda then. The first item is 262 Campbell Parade, Bondi Beach. And the first speaker we have is Mr. Lee Cosnetta. And I think he has with him, or separately, the architect or one of the architects. Is Mr. Cosnetta present?
Yes, good afternoon, panel. Afternoon, Chair.
Or good afternoon.
I believe we have Gabby from SJB Architects in the group as well today.
That's Gabriel, sir.
That's right, correct. That's me.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, panel chair and panel members. I believe this is the 4th time a development application for this site has been presented to the panel. Again, with a recommendation for deferred commencement consent following another collaborative dialogue with council staff, particularly Kylie Lucas, who as always has prepared a very detailed report in consultation with Angela Rossi and the DBU. We're pleased to have received the endorsement of council's planners, the Design Excellence Panel and Council's Heritage Advisor yet again for this project. In short summary, we endorse all of the recommendations in the report, inclusive of all the deferred commencement matters and the conditions of consent. The report acknowledges that there is a significant numerical variation to the FSR standard. However, the proposal actually decreases FSR of the already approved development. And as outlined in Kylie's report, there are no changes to the principal form of the building in relation to height or setbacks, so that already accepted as appropriate for the site in previously approved applications, noting there is still an active approval in place. Critically, the maximum building height identified in previous approvals has been retained, ensuring preservation of view sharing consistent with all previous approvals. A voluntary planning agreement accompanies this DA, offering a contribution of $737,000 to council. This has been accepted by council's strategic planners to be in accordance with their planning agreements policy and is due to be spent on council infrastructure close to the site and affordable housing in general. We welcome the ongoing engagement requirement with council's heritage advisor via conditions of consent to work through window reveal detailing and external cladding selection, which we accept are important components to the project's success, and we look forward to working with council on those items. Being in full agreement with the report and with no objectives today, I'm happy to forego the rest of my time, and Gabrielle and myself are available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Lee. Are there any questions of Mr. Cosnetta, or if we have any questions for the architect, he is available.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cosnetta, yeah, condition 20, which relates to public infrastructure works, are you and your client satisfied with that condition?
Yes, we are. I was finding it in the report, reminding myself. Yes, those details have all been reviewed and they're satisfactory.
Okay, thank you. So it's the only question I had.
Any other questions of Mr. Cosnetta?
I don't.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cosnetta. Now, do we have any questions of Gabriel Sir, one of the architects?
I don't.
Does any member of the panel have any questions for her?
No, I suppose just a point of clarification that you see that there is the opportunity and likelihood of coming to a successful design resolution in terms of those design changes, really, in terms of the context that the building is set within, that balance between solid and void and materiality.
Yes, absolutely. We've looked at the facade extensively, so we're quite happy with the breakup of things. Yep.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions or observations for Gabriel? Thank you for coming along, making yourself available. Well, that seems to be it then. So at the conclusion of the public meeting, we'll consider the application and notify our decision on the council website as soon as may be possible. Thank you to Mr. Cosnetta and Ms. Sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the next item, which is 92 Ramsgate Avenue, Bondi Beach. A modification application. I think the speakers that are available are Mr. Caravanis and Mr. Myerson, the architect. Who wants to go first? Mr. Caravanis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Morning.
I will go first, and Mr. Myerson will be available to answer any questions. So thank you for the opportunity to address you panel members. And of course, we're in support of the application. And I don't want to take too much of your time given the lengthy agenda that you have. Just like to confirm that we do not wish to challenge any of the conditions. We're happy with the report and of course the conditions. Also like to clarify that while the proposal does comprise an increase in the FSR when compared to the approved development, it does not result in any change to the external envelope of that particular approval. The new additions are at ground floor and first floor and some additions in the basement, and are still recessed from the side elevation, maintaining a degree of articulation, and only comprise highlight windows to the side. So in this regard, the proposal is consistent with the objectives of the standard, the FSR standard, as it does not result in any impacts on the amenity of the neighbours, and therefore it preserves the amenity of those neighbours, maintains the same appropriate presentation to the street, and in that regard remains consistent with the desired future character of the area, and also remains contextually compatible in the area. Therefore, members of the panel, the interface and the relationship with the neighbours and the street will not change when compared to the approval. In addition, you may note that the applicant has also submitted a letter of offer to enter into a planning agreement to provide a monetary contribution or that variation to the standard. Finally, the proposed additions comply with all other controls of both the LEP and the DCP. And for those reasons, we say that the proposal is appropriate for the site, the locality, and is worthy of approval, consistent with the recommendation. That's all I need to say at this stage. Happy to take any questions, either myself or Mr. Myerson.
Are there any questions of Mr. Caravanis from the members of the panel?
No, Mr. Chair.
No, I don't.
No, not from me.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Caravanis. Now, Mr. Myerson is available, the architect. If we have any questions, does anybody want to ask Mr. Myerson any issues or questions?
I don't have any questions.
All right. I'll assume the same for the rest of the panel. Well, Mr. Caravanis, I think unless Mr. Myerson wants to address us, we won't require him.
I won't let him.
No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. So,
Thank you.
as usual, at the conclusion of the public meeting, we'll consider this and the other applications and notify our decision accordingly on the council website. Thank you. The next item is 42 Farner Street, Waverley. I move that this matter be deferred to the next meeting of the panel next month due to a COVID scare involving one of the central speakers registered to speak. So I'll later on, when we come to this matter, I'll move that it be deferred to the next meeting. So that brings us to number 9, Zarita Street, Waverley. And let me just see the speakers list. The first speaker is Mr. Chris Webb. That person present, Chris Webb. We'll come back to that then. George Porter, I see, is present. Good morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Yes.
Yes. Your name is George Porter and you're from number 5 Zarita Avenue, Waverley.
That's right.
Yes, please go ahead.
5 Zarita Avenue is a pale orange house that overlooks the development site from the west, and I share the house with a friend who occupies the most affected ground floor bedroom and currently uses the adjoining second bedroom for online teaching. This proposal for a secondary dwelling and a pool has a significant number of non-compliance issues which are addressed in the planning report. And the planning report also identifies some of the adverse impacts. Although the most severe adverse impacts would be for number 7 Zarita Avenue, which is my next door neighbour, which is Chris Webb. I'd like to talk about the impacts on my home and my household in particular. The development site, 9 Zarita Avenue, is effectively 2 sites separated by number 7 Zarita Avenue, very unusual layout. The 2 sites are only linked by a narrow pathway, so the proposed development would be surrounded on all 4 sides by other people's homes, including my own. The rear wall of the proposed dwelling would be barely 3 meters from my ground floor windows. Instead of looking out onto a permeable shrub barrier at the moment, I'd be looking at a blank wall. I've provided a couple of images to panel members to demonstrate how significant this impact would be.
Yeah.
Every ground floor room in my house looks east onto the site, and in the case of the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom, the window looking onto the site is the only source of light. I should mention in passing that 2 of my 5 ground floor windows aren't even shown on the application drawings or on the shadow diagrams. In addition to a loss of visual amenity, the development would result in a severe loss not only of direct sunlight, but also of daylight to these windows. The proximity of the proposed dwelling and pool would adversely affect my privacy, with strangers being able to look into my bedrooms and living room. And I'm also concerned about security, given the physical separation of the development from the principal dwelling. This is particularly concerning if the dwelling is used for short-term lets, which I understand is the intention, because the owner's relatives who live overseas will only want to use it occasionally. I'm very concerned about noise impacts as well. I'd have to listen to visitors entertaining, listening to music, using the pool and generally coming and going. And the pool pump, I noticed, is located immediately outside one of my windows. Again, I'd mention that this window isn't even shown on the application drawings. Finally, I'd like to highlight the potential impact on the social cohesion of this neighbourhood. Almost everyone on Zarita Avenue knows each other, and many residents have been here for a long time. The proposal would change the character of the neighbourhood, and this is demonstrated by the fact that 12 out of 16 households in the street have objected. Their concern is not only for the direct social impact, but also that such an inappropriate development could be a precedent for development of similar unsuitable sites in the area. I therefore ask the panel to support the recommendations in the planning report, which recognises the adverse impacts that the proposal would have for myself and for others, and reject this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Any questions of Mr. Porter from the members of the panel?
No, I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Do you know if Mr. Webb is available? He doesn't seem to be in
He's available now.
Oh,
Hi, can you hear me okay? I've had some microphone issues.
yes, no, that's fine. That's fine.
Oh, fantastic.
So for the record, your name is Chris Webb and you're from number 7 Zarita Avenue, Waverley.
That's correct.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and thank you, panel members, for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Chris Webb and I live with my family at 7 Zarita Avenue, the 3-bed semi that adjoins 9 Zarita. My house is the house that separates the primary dwelling from the proposed secondary dwelling and swimming pool. This proposal would have a massive detrimental impact to every room in my house, every room. This application has quite rightly received a huge amount of objections from the neighbours in the community, and I note from Council's report that they have identified a significant number of non-compliances with critical development control requirements and have quite rightly recommended the application is refused. As anyone who's familiar with the site and the access to it, as George has just described, they'll understand the site is not suitable for a secondary dwelling with swimming pool. Firstly, as the plans show, the lot has an irregular layout. It's like a battle axe arrangement. And the only way you can access the secondary dwelling and swimming pool site is by along a very narrow pathway that lies on the southern side of my house. This path runs immediately alongside my house and as shown in figure 8 on page 225, the pathway runs past my bedroom and bathroom windows. My bedroom window sills next to this pathway are at waist height, meaning people walking along the path, including the tenants and the visitors and delivery drivers from Coles and Woolworths, etc., would all be able to look directly into my bedroom. So currently foot traffic past these windows is intermittent, used by residents to access their rear garden. And the introduction of the secondary dwelling, therefore, would result in a significant increase in foot traffic past these windows by people that we don't know at all times of day and night. And this creates a massive breach of privacy, noise disturbance, and significant security risks. Secondly, in addition to the impacts to our rooms on the southern side of the house, all our rooms on the western side of the house would be adversely impacted by noise from the swimming pool, which due to the size and location of the secondary dwelling is now squeezed right up next to my boundary. The pool is located just 2 metres away from the beds of my children and just 1 metre away from my outdoor living area. And to make matters even worse, the applicant also proposes to remove all existing landscaping along this boundary and erect a 2.1 metre non-compliant fence, which would just be 1 metre away from these western facing rooms. So this will result in a complete loss of natural light to all of my western facing rooms. So the combination of noise impacts and loss of natural light to these rooms is totally unacceptable. Thirdly, as George mentioned, the current owner of 9 Zarita has informed me she intends to rent out the secondary dwelling on a casual short-term basis, including letting it as an Airbnb. And the creation of such rentals is not the intent of the affordable housing policy, I'm sure, and is certainly not appropriate for this quiet family neighbourhood. It's well documented that rental properties of this nature are notorious for noise and antisocial behaviour. And due to the secondary dwelling and swimming pool being surrounded on all 4 sides by neighbours' properties and its physical separation from 9 Zarita, myself and the neighbours would bear the brunt of this noise and disturbance, and we would end up policing this antisocial behaviour. This application has created a huge amount of stress to me and my family. As mentioned previously, if this proposal went ahead, all living areas in our house would be significantly adversely impacted, and it would set a dangerous precedent for future developments. So in consideration of these impacts and noting all of the non-compliances, this development application is in my view unreasonable and totally inconsiderate. And I ideally hope the panel will support Council's recommendation to refuse this proposal. Thanks for your time today and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Are there any questions of Mr. Webb from the panel?
No, thank you.
No, not from me.
No, not from me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Next speaker is Jane Mcmillan. Is she present? Jane Mcmillan present?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Ah, yes, we can. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
You can't see me. Oh, okay. Right. Yes, I can start. Can I address the panel now? Yes?
Yes, please go ahead.
My name's
You're
Jane.
the town planner representing the applicant.
Yes, that's right. I'm the town planner who prepared the statement of environmental effects. This development proposal is fully compliant with the planning controls that apply to the site, the SEP for affordable rental housing, and council's the Waverley LEP regarding floor space ratio. The development is actually very modest, being less than half the allowable floor space ratio that applies to the site. So the owner would be in their rights under the provisions of the LEP and the SEP for affordable rental housing to have a development double the size as what is proposed. The secondary dwelling itself is only 38 square metres in size, which is well less than the allowable 60 square metres for a secondary dwelling under the SEP. I feel that the proposal is consistent with the objectives of the state policy. The owner is from Sweden, I believe, and one of the purposes of to have the secondary dwelling is to provide accommodation for her mother when she comes to visit and other family members. Regarding council's reasons for refusal, in my submission to the panel on the last page of my report, I would argue that it could not be justified that the application would be refused on the grounds of bulk and scale or massing, given that the proposal complies with the setbacks, is well under less than half the allowable floor space ratio for the site, and is a single-storey dwelling that has a height of 3.8 metres, 3.38 metres, when the allowable height is 8.5 metres under the LEP. I just want to also point out that the alterations and additions that council has approved for 7 Zarita Avenue in the past, which also I believe included studio and garage, go right to the boundary, to the northern boundary of 9 Zarita, and also right to the western boundary with 5 Zarita, and have a much greater site coverage than what is proposed. The site coverage that's proposed, as I've put in my report to the panel, is much less than what council has approved, and I have for 7 Zarita, which is on page 3 of my report. Regarding privacy impacts, I've pointed out in my report there are no windows at all to the northern elevation of the proposal or the western elevation, and on the eastern elevation, we do propose an increase in the boundary fence of 300 mil. But regarding the southern elevation, the heights of that proposed window, are below the height of the existing fence. So if the panel didn't agree with having an increase in the boundary fence height, that would only be required on the eastern elevation of the site. Just to conclude, council has in the past approved a swimming pool and studio. The swimming pool was approved under a DA in 2014, and that was very in proximity to the western boundary of the site. And our view is that if council previously considered that part of the site suitable for a studio and a swimming pool in 2014, we feel that there would be no reason why this modest proposal would not be acceptable to council. Given that the small size of the secondary dwelling, it would be a maximum of 1 to 2 people. We don't feel that that would cause an unreasonable amenity impact to surrounding residents or regarding access to the site. We just feel, particularly in view of the built-up nature of that area, even though it is an R2 zone, it's fairly built up regarding the small lot size. And as I say, particularly when you consider what council has approved for 7 Zarita Avenue, with alterations and additions right to the boundary, we feel that this small, modest proposal is consistent with the landscape character, but most important, complies with the SEP for affordable rental housing the LEP, which are the main development standards. In addition, we argue that it has acceptable amenity impacts to adjoining properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mcmillan. Any questions of Ms. Mcmillan from the members of the panel?
No.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So at the conclusion of the public meeting, we will consider this application and notify our decision on the council website. Thank you very much to the speakers.
Thank you.
We move on then to the next item, which is 18 and 20 Allen's Parade, Bondi Junction. And there's Mr. Alexander Georgiopoulos. Is he present? Mr.
Yes, I am here, panel. Good afternoon.
Hello. Can't see you yet, but we can hear you.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, hello. So you're Alexander Georgiopoulos from 141 Ebley Street, Bondi Junction.
Correct, yes.
Please go ahead.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I won't say a lot because I understand that this development is already, well, the recommendation is already to refuse it, but I thought it's good to speak to a few points so that you can put a face to the name and rather than it just being an objection on paper. So 141 Ebley Street is located diagonally to the northeast of this proposed apartment block. Now, we don't directly border the property, but the way the properties line up, we're essentially just half a block diagonally away from where these the additional or the extended balconies would be located. And I just wanted to say that we're not sort of anti-development. We appreciate that we're in the heart of Bondi Junction, and there's going to be development in the area. And so, in principle, we haven't objected to the to the concept of a building being located in that area. But by the same token, we feel that that lines do need to be drawn, and we feel that the amendment that's being proposed is just a step too far, and we do urge the panel and the council to follow through on the recommendation and to refuse it. The rear of our property has 6 almost floor-to-ceiling glass windows that from our living area where we spend essentially all of our awake hours, and the proposed extended balconies would peer directly onto and into our living area and would essentially cause a significant disruption to our privacy and overlooking. And in addition to that, I think the amendment is significant not just because it extends balconies closer to us and to the properties at the rear, but it creates essentially, it turns apartments from a 1-bedroom plus study apartment to 2 bedrooms, and that's the significance of the amendment, not just the moving of balconies closer to or reducing the setbacks. The more bedrooms, the more people living there, the more people that can overlook and disrupt our privacy. So we just urge the council to take all that into consideration, and I don't really have anything more to say.
Thank you, Mr. Georgiopoulos. Are there any questions of this gentleman from the members of the panel?
Mr. Chair.
No.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. So at the conclusion of the public meeting, we will consider this and the other applications and notify our decision on the council website. So we can move along to 42 to 44 Hall Street, Bondi Beach, I beg your pardon. There are quite a number of speakers in relation to this matter. The first speaker is Mr. Bruce Hawker. Is he present, please? Mr. Bruce Hawker? Well, perhaps we come back to him. Mr. Ron Moss, Is he present?
Yes, I'm present.
Hello. Hello,
Hello.
Mr. Moss.
Yeah.
So just for the record, your name is Ron Moss and you are from apartment 140 Hall Street, Bondi Beach.
That's correct, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Submissions have been made in relation to the development next door, and they've all been considered by the council. But there are some issues that were raised in those submissions and in the council report that seem to have been based on some misapprehensions and misunderstandings of certain situations. In particular, we're most concerned by the overshadowing and the diminution in the solar access caused by this new development. Our building at 40 Hall Street is a block of units, 7 or 8 units in the building, and there are 3 units on the top floor, and they're the ones that are most particularly impacted by the overshadowing and the loss of solar access. The report suggested that our building basically overshadows itself, which might apply to the units on the lower floors, but it certainly doesn't apply to the units on the top floors. And the terrace, our terrace outside, is the only outdoor area that my wife and I have to enjoy in the building. And we have a barbecue area there, and we use that terrace, or I use that terrace every day. And the barbecue area at present we have an open space next to us, but there will be a blank wall immediately adjacent to that area, which I will be able to touch from our balcony. And this this development is going to be higher than our building. I'm sorry?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah. The report suggested that the upstairs area in our unit is a bedroom and a bar and a media area. I'm not sure where that information came from, but there's no bar or media area. I have a study upstairs, which I use every day of the week, much to my wife's dismay. And I'm upstairs in the living area. It's my living area, basically, and the terrace is immediately off that study, and it is used all the time by me. So it's a major component of our living area. And as you get older, you tend to want to be outside a little bit more. Another misapprehension in the report was that it suggested that we have views of Bondi Beach and the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't based on any inspection of the property. It was based on Google Maps or something. But we certainly do not have views of Bondi Beach. And we do have glimpses of the Pacific Ocean, but even those are being reduced gradually by the height of some of the buildings that are being allowed on the waterfront. So, and that was used as a justification for the loss of the views that we now enjoy to the west. Another major concern is the lack of setback on Hall Street, and also between our building at 40 Hall Street and this new proposal at 42. At present, there's a pathway, but the proposal goes right up to adjoin our building. And as I said before, I'll be able to touch this new building, which creates a most unpleasant situation. And I think the rest of my objections really were included in the submissions that were made, and I believe that there are other people that do want to speak. So rather than me just repeating what they're going to say, I might just finish off by referring the panel to that most respected legal precedent from the castle, that it's the vibe of the whole thing that is very upsetting.
Thank you, Mr. Moss.
Thank you very much.
Any questions of Mr. Moss from the members of the panel?
No.
No, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Moss.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Paul Pesh. Is he present, please? Mr. Pesh present? I understood he was going to be. What about Mr. Bruce Hawker? Is he present?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hawker. You are from apartment 3, number 40 Hall Street.
That's correct.
Yes, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and panel members, I endorse everything that my neighbour Ron Moss has said. The first thing I want to talk about is refers to page 39 of Waverley Council's report. It states that it recommends that an easement be granted by the unit holders at 40 Hall Street in order to allow garbage bins to be collected and moved from 42. I can advise the panel that the body corporate committee, which represents the owners of 40 Hall Street, has unanimously resolved that it will reject any proposal to provide an easement over its property, which would allow the movement of garbage bins by or on behalf of the residents of 42 Hall Street. I think it's important to make that point because that was a recommendation of the officers that there be that consent granted. We would also strenuously object to the bins from 42 Hall Street being moved by whatever means route to clutter the footpaths and driveways of homes in Concert Avenue. And this is a building which faces Hall Street, not Concert Avenue, and there could be anywhere between 14 and 22 bins, depending on how you read Council's report, being put into Concert Avenue, which is already cluttered with rubbish bins on collection days. So that point, I think, should be noted by the panel. We also object in the strongest terms to the loss of sunlight as identified in Council's report at page 28. Now, our apartment is a north-facing one, and under the amended DA, we would be losing the sunlight to our principal outdoor recreation space, which is level 3, from as early as noon in winter. And by 3 p.m, our outdoor area would be completely overshadowed by this building. Now, I'd like the panel also to note that the council report incorrectly states that our principal place of outdoor recreation is level 2. I don't know how they intuited that. They never asked us. In fact, it is the level 3 terrace where we sit to enjoy the sun and look after our garden, which I might say largely comprises Australian natives. We rarely use the second floor balcony as it's very open to neighbours. It's not sunny until late in the day. Also our office from where I'm speaking to you now is located on the 3rd level. It at the moment has some sunlight access. That may not be the case, probably will not be the case with the amended, if this proposal goes forward in the way in which it's proposed. And I might say that the only reason we are losing sun on level 3 is that the DA in question seeks to go higher than the permissible height for the site. We note that there are also inadequate setbacks for the proposed development, and we believe that this problem would be averted if the panel requires the height of the building to be lowered and proper setbacks. Sorry, I haven't had you on video. And proper setbacks imposed. We are concerned that this DA contemplates an Airbnb accommodation, which is evidenced by the absence of parking in the building. This will lead to more noise and we believe breaches of privacy and more pressure on street parking. If this DA is approved, then ameliorating measures like double glazing, privacy screens and other measures should be required by the panel. That's not to say that we approve of that going ahead, but that would be our position if you did determine that you wanted to continue with the third floor as proposed in this development application. The essential problem with this DA appears to us to be that the proposed building would be too high and too bulky and seeks to accommodate too many people and apartments. Put simply, we're expected to make all the concessions for a development that clearly tries to support too many dwellings, businesses and residences on a small footprint. So we believe that this amended DA should be withdrawn or reimagined in a way that takes into account the residents in the neighbouring buildings. As presently proposed, people living in our building and nearby buildings, including the one Paul Patch was, I think, going to refer to, will lose a lot of sunlight and other amenities, and in our case, we'll lose the quiet enjoyment of our privacy and possibly invasions of our privacy. As Mr. Moss has pointed out, his apartment will abut the development, and as he said, it's something he can touch. Look, we accept that the developer needs to make a profitable return on his investment, but we do not accept that this should be done in a way that overloads the site and disadvantages the neighbouring residences. We think it needs to be scaled back. And I'd also say that if this development does proceed, it should take into account the fact that there is a bookshop in the building next to it, which could very well be extremely adversely affected by the construction work that will go on. Within 200-metre radius of this building that I'm in, there are now 5, and if this goes ahead, 6 developments underway. It's a very, very heavy concentration of building activity in a very small place, small area, and it is having an impact on the way people can enjoy their lives here and the way businesses can conduct themselves. So I'd submit, Chairman, that the development needs to take better account of the adjacent buildings and the community itself, and should be withdrawn and resubmitted in a way that takes into account the concerns that Mr. Moss and I and others have made to this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Hawker. Any questions of Mr. Hawker from the members of the panel?
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hawker. Now, is Mr. Paul Pesh present, please?
Yes, I am. I hope the panel can hear me.
We can, and we can see you too.
Excellent.
For the record, your name is Paul Pesh from apartment 416 Consett Avenue, Bondi Beach.
That's correct.
Yes, please go ahead.
I thank the panel for its indulgence. I'm a little late appearing because of technicalities with the administration of the panel. I've brought my my device outside so you can actually see from my residence the 2 adjoining buildings. I'd like to endorse what Mr. Hawker and Mr. Moss have said previously. If you see here, you can see the 2 properties which are intended for demolition here. And I've prepared an illustration here. I hope we can see this, yes, of what the building itself would impose in that space.
Yes.
What will happen is likely to happen is a serious intrusion on my privacy here, as the other 2 submitters have pointed out as well for them. I will have full width balconies looking directly into my living area, into my main housing area here, which to me represents a significant intrusion of privacy. There appear to be no significant modifications to the proposal, despite my 2 submissions on this matter. If you look, you can see here on the building from which the 2 other speakers have addressed you. This is 40 Hall Street. Council has imposed in the building of this significant privacy measures. You can see the top terrace there has a planter all around the edge, which prevents direct overseeing. The lower apartments have also significant privacy panels, which have been mandated by council, translucent glass in that particular instance. If I swing around to the property that adjoins on the other side, beyond that, you can see also that council has imposed significant privacy considerations, screenings on that building to prevent direct line of sight and direct line of hearing between my property and other adjoining properties and that subject development. I'm also concerned at loss of sunlight here. The bulk of the building, which is the other speakers have also said seems rather large for the site, will block morning sunlight. And I asked the council to look at my previous submission to see, not council, a panel rather, I'm sorry, to see the impact of this intrusive and large building on me here. If I look down, if you look down, you can see here adjoining two heritage listed properties. They're on the listed on council's LEP. I note in the report that council's planning department was unable to get a heritage assessment from council's heritage planner. And I suggest this represents a failure of council's planning department in its providing to the panel of sufficient information to allow it to make an assessment, a proper assessment. The impact of the development on these two precious heritage properties will be such that their heritage value and their development potential will be significantly diminished should this be approved. Again, I ask the panel to look carefully at the submissions that I've put into the panel. I'd also like to, if I can, to put a word in for the bookshop adjoining the property. It's in the building on, as you can see, it's at 46 Hall Street. This building is suffering massively through COVID downturn, and the owner of the building, who's a vital part of this community here, along with the bookshop that she runs, she fears that the building will be fatally impacted unless suitable provision is made by the panel, by council, conditioning this so that there's some significant control over the construction period. I know it's not strictly a planning issue, but council can nonetheless impose conditions such that operation, that the social benefits of that are recognised during the construction period. I'm happy to take any questions should the panel want to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Pesh. Are there any questions of Mr. Pesh from the panel?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pesh, in the recommendation, in the, I think, condition 2, general modifications, there is a condition suggested that the balcony of unit 3.03, which is located at the rear of the building at the third level, be fitted with fixed or sliding privacy screens to a height of 1.5 metres. Is this the type of screening you're looking at? And would you say that, or I guess you prefer it to be on the units below? Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Mr. Brenner, thank you for the question. I would indeed suggest that similar screenings be placed on all levels of the building, and that council demand specific details, the panel demand specific details about what those screens might be. These are I've suggested in my submission, in fact, what these might be. I've faced similar conditions when I did my own works here that demanded privacy screens and setbacks through planters. And I would indeed urge the panel to condition the approval on those south-facing flats. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, Mr. Pesh?
No, I don't.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pesh.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker I have is Mr. Fayaz Shafiq from Muller & Co.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. I can't see you, but I can hear you, Mr. Shafiq.
Thank you. I'm just having some problems.
I leave to speak.
Yes.
So can you tell me the reason why I should grant that leave?
I am here to represent the Owners Corporation and to make some general comments. I wouldn't take too much of the panel's time because I think 3 other speakers before me have spoken at length.
I give you my leave. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I totally endorse what the other 3 speakers have previously said, and I won't take too much of the panel's time, but in my observation, the concerns of my client is the bulkiness of this development in relation to the area. In particular, the Owners Corporation is concerned with some issues regarding the parking, notwithstanding the requirements or policies of the council in relation to car parking. It appears that the applicants' experts calculations, there is required to be about 18 car parking spaces to be supplied. But that hasn't been properly explained in the application, and it appears that that might cause significant issues in relation to the area, in particular in relation to where the client's property is placed. It's a very busy primary street, and there hasn't been any on-street parking that could be made available for 18 residents, proposed residents of this development. And there hasn't, it does not have any secondary street or laneways to provide any alternatives. It is a significant concern. It'll bring a number of people, if this development goes ahead, into this area, and it is important that parking should also be sufficiently explained. The second issue that I wish to address is in relation to some geotechnical concerns that the Owners Corporation has. The proposal that supported the application doesn't sufficiently explain the geotechnical consequences related to neighboring properties. There is no doubt some concession in the geotechnical report that this is a problematic site, and therefore in relation to that, and given that in recent times we've had some media exposure to certain properties in the area relating to geotechnical issues, this has to be, this is a significant issue, and it must be scrutinized very closely by the council, because this is not only going to impose some liability on the developer, but it is going to affect the liability of the council. In relation to the geotechnical concerns, we submit on behalf of the Owners Corporation that the application should provide some further details as to what the developer proposes in terms of addressing those concerns. I don't think I would like to address any further, because I think all the other issues that I had come prepared to address has already been addressed by 3 other earlier speakers, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shafiq. Are there any questions of this gentleman from the members of the panel?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shafiq. Now, next speaker is Mr. George Caravanis, planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So just for the record, your name is George Caravanis and you're the town planner representing the applicant.
Yes, I am, and I have the architect here with me on separate video link, Mr. Mark Shapiro, who'd be available to answer any questions as well. Thank you once again for the opportunity to address you. And again, I'd like to confirm that we concur with the assessment contained in the council officer's report, and of course the recommendation for approval. And once again, we do not wish to challenge any of those conditions that are recommended by that report. The proposal was the subject of a formal pre-DA meeting with council and has been revised in accordance with those pre-DA minutes, as well as subsequent comments both from council staff and the Design Advisory Excellence Panel. Now, as you may be aware, the proposal is permissible, is a permissible form of development in the B4 mixed-use zone, and complies with the development standard of FSR, and for most part complies with the height. The part of the building that does not comply with the height is the lift overrun, which is only 500 above the height limit and a very small portion of an upturn. Both of those elements do not result in any impacts by way of loss of use, loss of solar access, or of course, loss of privacy. So in that regard, the proposal comprises an envelope that is anticipated generally by the Council's statutory planning controls. An assessment has also been made by the Council's officers in light of the provisions of SEP 65 and the ADG, and the proposal compares favourably in respect of those provisions. The proposal is also considered to be consistent with the relevant provisions of the DCP, which talk about front and rear setbacks. Now, where impacts have been identified, these are considered to be satisfactory due to the compliant nature of the proposal with the FSR and for most part the height, the site's location in the B4 zone, and of course the additional conditions that we are not challenging. We believe that the proposal represents an appropriate addition to the Hall Street commercial strip and is considered to be consistent with the desired future character of the area, which is embodied in those controls. In respect of the matters just raised relating to overshadowing, for example, as indicated, and the Council Officer's report has confirmed this, the minor area of non-compliance with the height does not give rise to any impacts by way of overshadowing. The shadow that's cast by the proposal is a function of a compliant building form, both the FSR and the setbacks. Respect of privacy, the gentleman that addressed the panel is one property away from the site. The site is separated by another property, which the proposal will look over the roof of that particular building. The separation distances from that particular objector are well in excess of 12 metres. And again, we don't have any problem in accepting the condition for the privacy screen on the upper level. We don't see any need for privacy screens on the lower levels. Finally, in terms of the final objection raised by the representative of the Owners Corporation, in terms of the car parking, the Council's car parking control is a maximum control and the proposal does comply with that control. There is provision for bicycle parking as per the DCP. For all these reasons, members of the panel, we believe that the proposal is appropriate, is contextually compatible, and is what is anticipated by the Council's controls and what the desired future character seeks for this particular area. To reduce this, the building form would result in a reduction in a already compliant level of floor space and envelope. I thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions, as is my architect, Mr. Mark Shapiro.
Thank you, Mr. Caravanis. Any questions for Mr. Caravanis from the members of the panel?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just on that issue of the privacy screens, you do accept the condition regarding the privacy screen across the balcony to unit 3.03. Just looking at the plans, there appears that you also propose, as well as a planter box to the rear unit 2.04, that there is some form of privacy screen there shown on the southern elevation. I guess one of that, is it one of those movable screens? Could you comment on that, or Mr. Shapiro?
First, I'd like to state that there is a planter, so there is not the opportunity for someone to stand right at the edge of that particular balcony, and that applies to both the balconies on the first floor and the second floor. And I'll just go to the plan that you're referring to.
DA 2300B, which is a section, and then DA 2401B.
In terms of that screening on that side, I'd just like Mr. Shapiro to confirm that, please.
There is, sorry, thank you, Chair, and thank you, George. Yeah, there is some sliding privacy screen proposed there. However, the predominant privacy feature is, as you have said, the planter box. So, whereas on the level above, we'll be accepting the council condition. So,
yeah, you do propose some
some
screens at that second level.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Caravanis or Mr. Shapiro, the architect?
Oh, I was just going to ask Mr. Shapiro if he's had a look at clause number 26, public infrastructure works.
Condition 26.
Yes.
Yes, we have.
And what's your response to that?
Oh, we don't have any issue with that. I mean, we'll work through that with our civil engineers and with council, but we don't see any major concerns. I think it's fairly standard conditions with these types of developments.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
Any further questions either for Mr. Shapiro or Mr. Caravanis?
Oh, yeah. I just, there's been considerable submissions and about protecting access to the adjoining shops. There is a condition on the consent that requires a hoarding to be constructed at the front.
Brett, come in. Sorry.
Hello?
Oh, keep going.
No.
Yeah, condition 15 requires the construction of a hoarding across the frontage. But I'd like to propose, or I may propose later, that be a B-class hoarding, which would maintain full access to over the footpath in Wall Street. Would you like to comment on that? Thank you.
I think that would be appropriate given the location. So we would not have any concern with that proposal.
Thanks, Mr. Shapiro.
Well, if there's no further questions of either Mr. Caravanis or Mr. Shapiro, I'll thank them for their contributions. And at the conclusion of the public meeting, we will consider this application and notify our decision on the council website. Thank you very much. We'll move on then to the next item, which is 78 Military Road, Dover Heights. The first speaker I have is Mr. Lee Cosnetta.
Afternoon again, Chair.
Yes, hello. And you're the planner representing the applicant.
I am, yes. And Mr. Shapiro, who just spoke, is the architect available for questions as well.
Yes. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. As with the first item from today, we're fortunate to have received a positive recommendation following another strong dialogue with council staff, in this case, Judith Elijah, who prepared another very detailed report in consultation with Bridget McNamara and the DBU. We're pleased to have received the endorsement of the council's planners and the traffic engineers who engaged openly and in great detail with us following an earlier request for additional information. In summary, we endorse, again, all of the recommendations in the report, inclusive of all conditions of consent. Given the feedback on other items today, I've reread the public infrastructure condition and confirmed that in this case as well, that condition is satisfactory. The report acknowledges there's an acceptable variation to the FSR standard that doesn't cause any significant impacts, no additional bulk or scale to the building, with the GFA cited appropriately in response to the site's topography. The building has a two-storey appearance from both Military Road and Cattigal Place, consistent with the surrounding character. And in fact, it'll be the smallest and lowest of any recent developments in this section of Military Road. The majority of the building is significantly below the maximum building height, complies in all areas, and excavation is limited by accommodating a split level design down the block. The report accepts there are no adverse amenity impacts to the surrounding properties from the variation standard, in particular referencing overshadowing, view loss and privacy is discussed in great detail in Judith's report. What isn't noted in the report is that we also received letters of support from the only physically adjoining property at 76 Military Road as part of the original DA submission, in addition to a subsequent letter reaffirming their support of the swimming pool location at roof level, which offers increased privacy to their principal living and bedroom areas, as well as letters of support from two properties across the road at 35 and 37 Military Road. We thank the officers for their report and being in full agreement And again, with no objectors here today, I don't intend to take up more of the time and take questions if you want.
Thank you, Mr. Cosnetta. Any questions from the members of the panel to Mr. Cosnetta?
No, none from me, Mr. Chair.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Cosnetta. Does Mr. Shapiro wish to address us, or is he available to answer any questions?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate Mr. Cosnetta's comments, and I have nothing further to add unless you have any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Shapiro, the architect?
No, Mr. Chair.
Everybody happy? All right, well, thank you very much, both of you, for attending. So at the conclusion of the public meeting, we'll consider this application and notify our decision accordingly. Thank you. We move on then to the agenda item number 8, which is 10 Rawson Avenue, Queen's Park. The first speaker is Mr. Anthony Notaris from 12 Rawson Avenue. Is he present, please? Mr. Notaris present?
Yes, hello.
Hello there. Not see you.
Okay, sorry, here we go.
That's better, that's fine, that's fine.
All right.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Notaris.
I'll start by mentioning the issue with 2 other properties today, and that, like in 42 Varna Street and also at 92 Ramsgate Avenue. To me, it's exactly the same situation where there is a large undercroft underground area that is not going to be considered with the original DA, and they'll come back later and add it on and say, hey, this is not changing the size of the house at all. And here we have a large undercroft area. So to give you an idea, I'll just turn this around. That marking on the wall, that's the height of the new ground floor of this property. It's some 1.8 metres off the ground here, and it's about 1 metre over the existing height of this single-storey house. Now, it's about 2 metres off the ground level underneath the house, and so he only really needs to dig out about 0.5 metre of soil, and he'll have room for a massive underground building, underground room. And I just want you to consider that when you consider the floor space ratio of this property. As you can see, this house, this is the wall that I look at in my house. There's quite a considerable wall. From the back gutter, the height will be 5 metres higher than that point. It's actually, the setback isn't quite as far as that. The setback is the rear blue line there, but it's 5 metres over the gutter height. Now, to give you a comparison to my own house, which is a double-storey house, it's almost 3 metres higher. Like I could almost put a 3rd story on top of my house and it will be the same height. Now, with respect to our neighbours, we're on a hill here, goes back from side to side and front to back. That house behind me there, that greenhouse, that's actually a 3-storey house. So their backyard is actually about at least 1 metre down underneath. So I'm trying to say is that the height, any additional height is exaggerated over the properties. During the gap there between that brick house and the grey house, there's actually another house down underneath there. So this is I sent one of the things I sent in, that little, where the roof comes down from the top and then it sort of flattens out. The height indicated on the plans is wrong by about 1 metre. So that means all of the shadow diagrams that you rely on are incorrect. And I only know this because I took some photos on around summer solstice and against these windows. These windows here, north facing, this is to my living area, and they were considerably wrong. So my main issues with this house are twofold. One is the fact that it's been raised up by this undercroft area that's going to happen here. And the second thing is that it has no side setbacks at all. Now, council has made an assessment based on winter shadow diagrams, and I think that that's really bad assessment, because what they've said is it won't make any difference in winter. But of course, there's 364 other days of the year, and as I showed in the with the plan, the shadow diagram that was provided to me by my neighbour last year, that in summer it would make an effect. And I've made some calculations that a side setback with a 2.4 metre lowering of height would mean that I would get all of the sun that I currently get in my living area. So there would be no change. So that would leave the house at some around 6.1 metres high. So look, I do realise that the house, could be higher than that, and I will lose some sun in winter. But I think it's really unfair that my neighbour has said, and council has accepted, that because I'm going to lose my sun in winter, that I may as well just lose it all year round. Now, I also provided some information about the heights. So in this vent, I had a surveyor come, and he was able to take a measurement of the height of the house through that vent. And that height measurement was actually lower than the height of my courtyard. The top of the vent here is actually it's just where the floors are here. Underneath, it's a typical house where you've got the bearers and the joists underneath there. And he is claiming that this is the ground level here. And of course, you can see through these vents that the ground level is actually underneath these large sandstones. So when you look through this vent here, it's actually even lower still. But I'm willing to accept that the ground level of my courtyard is much the same. Now it comes to the rear here, where there's a real issue. This line here is where the existing house comes to, and he's building another 800 millimetres past that. So as an example, let's say this was the ground height and that was acceptable here, then his garage, like mine, is much lower than the height of the house. But his plans and council have completely accepted that his ground height is the same as what the house is, but clearly the ground height is much, much lower. And in fact, his survey shows that it's 1.1 metres lower than the existing ground height. And if you use that ground height that's in his survey with the height of the building, then the height of the building is 8.59 metres. So it's above the LEP. It doesn't have a clause 4.6 request. It has a flat roof, and it's a metre above the flat roof control. It doesn't have any side setbacks. Its rear setbacks aren't in line with the neighbour's house. So it's just devastating for me. I will get no sun at all, except for right in the middle of summer. And I have an approved deck over this garage here. The height of it will majorly overshadow that in winter. So I'm only likely, this is completely in sunshine at the moment. When this thing's built, it will only have about 20% sun access on the whole courtyard. So, my whole house, there's literally nowhere to go and sit in the sun, and there's nowhere I can get any sun within the house at all. This is my daughter's bedroom upstairs. From the top window there, the house will be 1.6 metres higher than that. And in addition, my neighbour has basically said to me, I'm putting scaffolding up in your house. It's going to be running all down the side here. It's going to take, a third of my courtyard, and I'm not going to allow it. So, that's basically it.
Thank you, Mr. Notaris. Are there any questions of Mr. Notaris from the members of the panel?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Notaris.
Thank you for the opportunity.
The next speaker is Juliet Russell. Is she present? Is Juliet Russell present?
I'm pressing unmute. Have you got me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes, but you can't see me. I wonder why.
That's right. It doesn't matter. We can hear you. That's the main thing.
Doesn't matter.
For the record, you're from 145 Denison Street, Queensland.
I'm from 145 Denison Street, which is directly behind this development.
Right.
And because it's behind, it's down the hill a bit. My property, excuse me if I read this, I'm not good on doing this. I've never done a
Don't worry.
Zoom thing before. It sits directly behind across Rawson Lane, which is quite a narrow lane. And it drops, my property drops down about 1 metre from the lane, following the topography of the land. Therefore, I'm going to look up on this building and I will lose significant sun and privacy and summer sun. My objections have been the height of the and the bulk of this building, as it's set back only 5 metres from the boundary line and is at least 3.4 metres closer than the adjacent property at number 8, which already takes a bit of my light. My house sits on its original footprint, and it's only got a very small garden. It's only about 5 metres deep, so I'm very close to this property. It's just across the lane, and I will look up on it. In my submissions, I raised the issue of the topography of the land and the need to measure the height of the roof from the true ground level. This has been responded to, but I don't believe there is sufficient evidence that's been provided or that this point has really been addressed. Previously, the below floor levels in number 10 were easily accessible. I know this because the person who owned it was a very good friend of mine. But due to the recent illegal development on this property, and there has been a bit of that, it's no longer possible to access the below floor levels. This 2-storey building then sits above the height of the garage, and therefore it has an appearance, in fact, of a 3-storey building from the rear, although still a 2-storey at the front. And furthermore, the building rises up from the rear of the property, and the land actually drops away by approximately 2.84 metres. I'm not good on numbers, so don't rely on me entirely, but that's what it says in the report. So despite the fact that it's, the topography comes down, the property is going up. Okay, so a review, let's get around that one. A review of the impact of shading on properties fronting Denison Street doesn't, for some reason, include 145. It does those either side, but not 145. Maybe someone's, that was a little error. This may be minimal in winter, I accept that, but there is a significant loss of afternoon sun in the summer. I don't know whether that should concern you or not, but it will concern me. I'm concerned also about the impact on the neighbours and speak on their behalf. There have been numerous submissions and they have asked me to speak on their behalf. I accept that there must be development on this sign, on this site, but I regret that there's been no consultation by the developer and no opportunity to look at further compromises In the past, our neighbours have consulted and we've come to good resolutions, including a 3-storey property on my southern side, which fits in very nicely with everybody and took nobody's light. I accept that I will lose light. I accept that I will have a property, a 2-storey property behind, but I do object to the size and the bulk of this property. And I ask you to do whatever you do.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Any questions of Ms. Russell from the members of the panel?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next speaker. Mr. Stephen Griffiths from Bondi, is he present?
Yes, Justine, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Hello, Mr. Griffith. Now you need my leave to speak, and I think you're speaking on behalf of Mr. Notaris, number 12.
That's correct, yes, and I ask that you grant me the leave because I wish to just add to some of the points with respect to the non-compliance with the local environmental plan building height development standard that Mr. Notaris touched upon.
Is this in relation to the height development standard?
Yes.
Yes, I'll give you leave to address us on that.
Thank you very much. The point I wish to make on the height development standard is that there is a non-compliance with the height development standard, which has not been picked up in the council's assessment. The panel should have a submission that I prepared a couple of days ago, as dated 23 of August, and that has 2 extracts from the applicant's documentation, which show where I say that this non-compliance occurs.
Yes.
The first extract is an overlay of the proposed development, the architectural floor plan of the proposed development on the survey. And that shows that at the northeastern corner of the proposal, it overhangs the existing garage level, which is at a point which dictates that to the top of the parapet of the proposal, the height of the building will be over the development standard. Now, this hasn't been picked up by the applicant or the council assessment. The second extract in my submission is from the long section of the applicant's architectural plans, and that shows a vertical measurement of 8.83 meters from the proposed garage level to the parapet of the rear of the proposal. Council does not have a clause 4.6 request to justify the non-compliance. And in those circumstances, the panel's power to grant consent is simply not enlivened under clause 4.6. The other point that I will make on that is that the panel cannot impose a condition to require compliance, because the court has held that it is the development for which consent is sought that is required to comply with the development standard, and not conditioned or a development as it emerges, if you like, when consent is granted. Those are the main points on that.
I hesitate to interrupt you, but I should apprise you of certain information which you're probably not aware of. So early this morning, the council received from the applicant amended plans. Those amended plans purport to delete the purported breach of the height that you have identified in your submission yesterday, and chamfered that whole area off to lower the height to comply with the height limitation in the LEP. So that plan doesn't require notification, because it's only a minor amendment within the council rules. Minor amendments don't get re-notified, so it looks as if it doesn't have to be notified. So we'll have a look at that plan and see what the impact is, and see whether or not it does comply with the purport to comply with the height limitation in the LEP.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm not surprised that that is the case.
Well, they could have done a clause 4.6 instead, but they chose to make the amendment set out in the plan.
Yes, I would just urge caution on the panel's part as to reviewing these documents on the run.
Of course, we will.
Yes, when the applicant has had a long time to address this issue and has done it a day before the panel meeting. But that's for the panel. I offer no other comment on that. If I could ask for indulgence to cover one other point.
Yes.
It's in regards to the amount of development control plan non-compliances that the proposal relies on.
Is this the wall height issue? Or?
It's the wall height, it's the
Yes.
side setback, and I was going to say it's a rear setback at first floor level, but that might now be addressed. I wouldn't be able to tell you that, but as the panel has heard, there is quite some conjecture about what is actually the measurement of this wall height. But the council report acknowledges that the proposal does not comply with the wall height now. They accept that there's non-compliance with that. They also accept that there's a non-compliance with the side setback requirement for the southern boundary. And those non-compliances have really been justified by providing that the existing side setback is at 0, it's on the boundary, and therefore this proposal should also have the same setback. But as Mr. Notara said, the wall height on the southern boundary is now going to be more than double what is existing, and really the visual impact, the bulk and scale impact have not been dealt with. The solar access impacts have been dealt with, but we say not to a significant or satisfactory regard, because the DCP says where more overshadowing is proposed, where the minimum requirement is not achieved, then it really shouldn't be supported for further overshadowing. Whereas in this case, it's justified. And in the council report, there's even comments that these are guidelines, DCP controls, and therefore not determinative. Well, I would say that's not the correct approach to take. And it certainly undermines council's position with respect to its DCP for other applications. We have suggested in the course of our submissions some what we say are reasonable amendments to the proposal. They would be to step the development down with the slope of the land so that at the rear point where the impacts are the most, the development is lower than what it is proposed as currently. That the first floor is set back from the southern side boundary. Again, that will give some visual and bulk and scale relief, and that ceiling heights are minimized to reasonable levels for habitable spaces, of course. And really those amendments have not been taken on board by either the council or the applicant, where we say they would not result in significant impacts on the yield, but would have a significant impact on reducing the detrimental impacts of the proposal overall. So happy to take any questions, but those are the submissions that I'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Any questions from the members of the panel to Mr. Griffith?
Sorry, there's a rare plane going overhead here where I am.
Any questions from the panel members? No? Well, thank you, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. George Simortos, the applicant. Is he present, please?
Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Thank you,
And for the record, your name is George Simortos and you're the applicant.
Correct.
Yes, please go ahead.
I've also, I'm not sure if they've admitted him into the meeting, but I've got Martin Tanorski, who designed this building for me. I'm not sure if he's listening.
Yes.
If you have any questions for him, he'll be able to answer those once I finish speaking. But thank you for letting me speak. I just want to, so myself and council have worked following submission of my DA to satisfy all the council's concerns, as well as all the submissions and concerns raised by my neighbours, which my intention from the outset was to minimise any impact to my neighbours. And you'll see that from my final submission. There's no compliances in FSR. In fact, now with the amended plans that were issued yesterday or this morning to council, following the new information raised by my neighbour that was only notified a day ago, we're quite under the FSR at the moment, the compliant FSR, removing the need for a clause 4.6. My neighbour raises concerns about the height and ground level. I've addressed those through providing a registered survey plan of my existing house, to the point where I've included in my submission, and it's accessible to all members of the panel, the back of my house where I removed my stairs down to the terrace level and identified where the rock level was at, which is consistent with the width of the vent. I haven't modified the floor level of my house since I bought it more than 5 years ago, and just seems crazy for me to think that I can't assume that to be my ground level. But a survey has been provided as part of the submission. On the items raised about setbacks on the northern side, again, in assessing council's comment and working together with council to come up with a fully compliant scheme, you would see that I've introduced a 900 mm setback along the northern boundary, removing the need for a clause 4.6 there. With the issues raised about the southern setbacks at 0, one that needs to see around all entire Queen's Park that there are terrace style cottage houses where developments have been approved with nil setbacks due to the nature of the buildings and the orientations and the size of them. We're only sitting on a 550 square metre block. So to claim that a setback's needed there is ludicrous. With respect to items raised again by my neighbours and council about overshadowing diagrams, we provided a number of multiple additional overshadowing diagrams as part of the revised submission to council, both for the neighbours across the road on Denniston Avenue, as well as the northern and southern neighbours, and they all comply with the requirements of overshadowing measured at the winter solstice. I'm not sure why we're talking about summer. With respect to the item raised about consultation by one of my neighbours, I'd like to correct her and advise that prior to my submissions of both my DAs, the previous DA that's under separate proceedings, and this DA, I consulted both neighbours with my plans prior to submission. So there definitely was consultation there. Not that that matters. I'm fully compliant with the LEP with respect to building heights, now with the revised documents issued to council and the panel members, and there's no breaches there. Council have inspected property, and I did walk them through the property to show them my existing ground level in part of making the application and assessment. I will note that even though previously approved under separate DA, I reduced the size of my dormer, further reducing the impacts to the neighbourhood. The dormer has now been reduced to the size of width of 1.775. That is why council's concerned. My neighbour at number 12 Rawson Avenue raised earlier that he would expect a 2.4 metre decrease in height. That would insinuate that I don't add an extra story to my property, which again does not make sense. Everybody in the area has, or a large number of applicants have been approved to 2-story developments, and that just doesn't make sense. We're complying with all the relevant height standards. There were notes raised by my neighbour about his balcony's terrace, the back on Rawson Lane, about overshadowing. His own development consent that's been approved by council requires a 1.8 metre high fence on his boundary that causes most of that overshadowing. With respect to his item raised on no scaffolding, at no point have I said that I would be putting scaffolding on his property. All works that are required under construction will occur within the confines and boundaries of my property. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Simortis. Are there any questions of Mr. Simortis from the members of the panel? Are there any questions from the members of the panel to Mr. Simortis?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Brennan.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, having trouble with the video.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, there it is. And it may be to his designer, just looking at the plans, and it's been mentioned before, the step up to the living room, which is about 3 or 4 steps, so that you get level access to the terrace. Has the owner or his designer looked at an alternative scheme whereby the existing floor level in the cottage was maintained and thus providing a reduction in height of that southern wall?
Yes, we have, and I can answer that if you like, or up to you. Yes, we have, and we provided the reasoning behind that to council because it was the same question raised by council. If we to do that, then you affect the garage, where you would not have a compliant garage in height. If you maintain that level there, you would also wouldn't have compliant laybacks or be able to drive your car into the property. We are on a sloping public domain. I am on the higher side of my neighbour at number 12 Rawson, and you cannot continue that internal floor level. You would end up with a non-compliant floor to ceiling height in the garage. And we have provided those diagrams as part of our response to council, and they are aware of them. Martin, if you want to add anything else to that, you can answer that as well.
Hi, panel and Mr. Chair. Yes, as George indicated, we provided information to council on that question. To lower the garage would require us to actually set the garage in underneath the main portion of the house. So there was the diagram and information given to council, it was deemed not appropriate.
Thank you. Further question is, who prepared shadow diagrams, and is anyone certified the shadow? I don't know who they've been prepared by, or the expertise and the program that was used.
I prepared the diagrams. The building and its context is modeled in 3D model using ArchiCAD software, and the shadow diagrams are taken from that modeling software. And yes,
thank you.
That's a standard CAD software that's used in architectural design.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the panel?
No, I was going to ask that question, so it's fine.
Well, thank you very much to the speakers.
Thank you, panel members.
So at the conclusion of the public meeting, which will be very shortly, we will consider this and the other applications before us today and notify our decisions on the council website as soon as may be possible. Let me thank all the members of the public and the consultants that have addressed us today. It's been very helpful, and we'll take everything into consideration in making our decisions later on this afternoon. So with that, I will close the public meeting and leave it. Thank you. Now, can I suggest to members of the panel that we have a break for some lunch? We're behind schedule, which is not surprising. But can I suggest that we come back at 2 o'clock, or is that too soon?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Fine.
That's fine with me.
Fine with everybody, is that right?
Yeah,
that's fine.
All good.
Come in on the
Thank
other
you.
link. Come back on the other link, all right?
Thank you. Yep.
Okay.
Sure.
I'll see you at 2 o'clock then.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Paul.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you then. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Holy,